Hi again, Risa here, back with another episode of Ask Risa. This is my fortnightly video series where I discuss some common wedding planning questions and problems that you might be having if you're trying to plan your own wedding. I have decided to finally start addressing the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19 and how the hell you're supposed to plan a wedding while also dealing with the global pandemic. So last week was the first video in my series where I discussed alternatives to dancing, since dancing is not a great idea right now, given how dangerous it is. And so this week, part two, I'm going to talk about how to have a socially distanced ceremony. And then basically I'm covering pre-ceremony up to the ceremony today. And then in 2 weeks, I will talk about cocktail hour and reception and how to handle food service and things like that. But I don't want this video to be excessively long, so I'm gonna break this up into two. So there are also a whole bunch of videos in this series from the before times that you can find on my IGTV tab on Instagram or on my channel on YouTube, depending on where you're watching this, because there's a boatload of information about wedding planning that I have been handing out for free over the past year and a half. So, socially distanced wedding ceremonies. Let's see what we can do about this. So, pretty common, especially in warm climates like here in Sacramento, is to have welcome beverages. Usually this is a self-serve station where we put water, potentially iced tea, potentially lemonade. We have them in those little dispensers with the little push things, and you dispense it into a paper or plastic cup. That's not gonna work. You can't do self-serve anything because you don't want multiple people touching the same thing. So you can still do welcome beverages, and you should still do welcome beverages if you live in a hot climate, but you should have someone there to man the station. Someone who is wearing a mask, wearing gloves, and all the dispensers should be turned in, not out facing where people are walking, but the dispensers should be turned in toward the person who is manning the booth or table, as it were. And that person can dispense into the cup whatever the guest wants and then hand it to the guest. And as long as the person doing the dispensing is gloved, then that should be fine. They can wear a mask so they won't breathe on anybody. And that's a safer way to do welcome beverages. Also, typically when guests arrive, one of the things they do is sign the guest book. And usually we have a few pens out, but multiple people are definitely using the same pen. Again, not a great idea. You don't want multiple people to have to be touching the exact same thing. Even though the odds of transmission of COVID-19 are lower on surfaces than they are through breathing in droplets, it's still, there's a non-zero risk of transmission through touching of surfaces. So we want to eliminate that risk as much as possible. Therefore, we should have no shared touching of surfaces. So instead, there's not really a great idea. Like, there's not a great way to have a guest book with like a pen for everybody. That's unrealistic. And most people don't carry pens with them. So it's not like you can ask people to just use their own pen. So the next best thing is to have plenty of sanitizing wipes and hand sanitizer on the guest book table with the guest book and the pens. And so everyone can wipe down the pen before they use it or after they use it, depending on how conscientious they are. And then they can sanitize their hands after they're done signing the book. And, you know, some people are being careless and lackadaisical about safety precautions. And if they choose to use a pen, not knowing who has touched it before them, and if they choose not to sanitize the pen before they use it, that's on them. But you should give your conscientious guests all of the sanitation supplies that they need to sanitize pens or anything else and minimize touching of shared surfaces. That's your best bet. Because you may have heard the term super spreader event. A wedding is a super spreader event. You're bringing a lot of people from a lot of places into a shared space for a prolonged period of time. That is an extremely risky scenario, which is why we're still not allowed to have weddings as of, what is it today, June 8th. We're still not allowed to have weddings in the state of California. Gatherings of non-family members are still legally prohibited in the state of California, despite what you may have seen on social media lately. So a super spreader event like a funeral or a wedding or a sporting event or a concert or any place where you have large amounts of people gathered together in the same space together, super spreader event. One person could infect dozens of people in that scenario. And then those dozens of people could potentially infect dozens more of people. And then before you know it, one person at a wedding caused an outbreak of 3,000 COVID-19 cases. That is not what we want. It's not what you want. It's not what I want. It's not what the government health officials want. Nobody wants that. So we have to be smart about this. I probably should have started with this point, but outdoors, the outdoors is safer than inside. So if you're having a ceremony, try to do it outside and try to have as much as the wedding outside as possible. A lot of times here in Northern California, almost all of my ceremonies are outside, but sometimes we have dinner inside. Actually, the majority of my weddings are entirely outside. Everything is held outside. But we live in Northern California where the climate is usually cooperative. If you live somewhere where there's summer thunderstorms or hurricanes or something like that, you have some weather constraints that you have to deal with. But the more that you can do outside, the safer your wedding will be. So next I want to talk about seating. One option is to not have any. You could just ask your guests to stand for the ceremony. Most ceremonies these days are 30 minutes or less. I hardly ever have a wedding ceremony go more than 30 minutes. A lot of them are only like 20 minutes. People can stand up for that long. It's not really that big of a deal. It's a lot easier for people to keep their distance from other people when they're standing. And, you know, families can sort of be a bubble together and then another family can be over here, a few feet away from them. And so you have pockets of people standing. You do need to make sure you have enough space for that. But having your guests stand is the safest option. But if you do want to have chairs, then there's kind of two different things you have to think about. First of all, usually we place the individual rows pretty close to each other. You're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to leave basically an entire space for chairs blank. So you'll have a row of chairs, and then where we normally would have had another row of chairs, there will be nothing. And then there will be another row of chairs well behind that. So you've got at least like 4-ish feet between rows. That's gonna cause you to need to back up your ceremony chairs. So you might then wanna make your rows longer, but the other thing to consider is you don't want people sitting too close to each other if they're not related to each other. So there's kind of two ways you can do this. You can either group the chairs together and leave blank spaces between them. So you'd have like 2 chairs and then a gap, and then 2 more chairs, and then a gap, and then 2 more chairs. Or you can put all the chairs in a row, but somehow convey to guests that they need to leave space in between families that aren't, you know, related to each other, either with a sign or with an usher, someone as people are being seated who can say, please leave 2 seats between you and anybody you're not, you know, related to next to you. The advantage to doing the second option, where you put all the chairs out in a row and just ask people to sit far away from each other, is that it looks less weird. It looks more normal. There's always gaps at any ceremony, most ceremonies, so it's less eye-catching if you have all those chairs and just some of them are empty. It will definitely look odd if you have clusters of chairs, like 2 and then a gap, and then 2 and then a gap, or 3 and then a gap, whatever, but you will save on chairs. So think about this. If you have 100 people coming to your wedding, okay, you normally would put out 100 chairs. But if you're now going to leave a bunch of those chairs empty to give people more space, well, now maybe you need 200 chairs when you still really only have 100 people coming, but now you have to get twice as many chairs. Whereas the other approach, you really still only need as many chairs as you have people, you're just spacing them out more. So it kind of depends on what's more important to you, cost or aesthetics, because spacing the chairs out saves you money, but looks a little odd. Putting the chairs in the normal configuration, but not using all of them is going to cost you more money, but will look more traditional. So it's up to you which one of those approaches you want to take. The officiant. You probably don't want your officiant wearing a mask because it's important that people be able to hear what the officiant is saying. So in lieu of wearing a mask, the best alternative is to just have the officiant stand back. Normally we have the couple and then we have the microphone on a stand, and then we have the officiant. Or sometimes if the officiant's wearing a lapel mic, there's no microphone on a stand. And so usually they're standing pretty close to each other, within a foot of each other. That's not ideal, especially because the officiant is talking, and you know, talking expels droplets, and we don't want the officiant to accidentally infect the couple who are getting married. That would be bad, not what we want. So have the officiant stand a little further back. At that point, you may need more microphones. You might need a stand microphone for the officiant, and then a separate microphone for one of the couple. Usually it's the groom in a bride-groom scenario, or if it's two grooms, you know, pick one. If it's two brides, that's a little trickier because lapel mics don't look great on wedding gowns. If one of the brides is wearing a suit, problem solved. If they're both wearing dresses, then maybe you want to do a stand microphone or a handheld microphone, a wireless mic for the vows, because you don't want people to have to project. Projecting expels more droplets. Also, fun fact, I have never in my life said the word droplets as many times as I've said in the past 2 videos. Like, this is a word I probably have never used before, and now I have used it dozens and dozens of times. So welcome to the new normal. Wedding party. You should consider limiting the number of people that you have in your wedding party. 4 on each side maximum. If you're gonna be in a tight constrained space, then I would say 2 on each side maximum. We want to be able to leave room between the wedding party members. We do not want to have them all scrunched up next to each other, which often happens if we have 5, 6, 7, 8 people on each side. It gets out of control. So just try to limit yourself. I know it's hard. I know everybody wants to ask everybody to be in their wedding. Maybe just have a maid of honor and a best man, or, you know, honor attendants, and don't have all the rest. And if you have one sister, ask your sister if you're close and none of your friends are in the wedding. That way everybody's feelings are hurt equally. You know, sometimes you have to make hard decisions to do what's best. And then also, typically we pair up, if there are both bridesmaids and groomsmen, we typically pair them up for walking in and walking out. Ask them if they're comfortable with that. A lot of times, people who are in weddings don't necessarily know the other people who are in the wedding party. And they might be paired up with someone that they've literally just met. And they may not be comfortable walking arm in arm down the aisle with someone that they don't know. So you need to communicate with your wedding party and find out what they're comfortable with, and then make adjustments as necessary. It's perfectly acceptable to have your wedding party members walk in individually. They do not have to be paired up. That's just a thing that a lot of people do, but not everybody does it. Even when we're not in a pandemic, not everybody pairs up their wedding party members. So definitely something to keep in mind. And then a couple little things. Not that many people do ceremony programs anymore, but if you were thinking of doing them, I suggest doing a large sign instead of individual paper programs. Just because, again, it's less stuff that has to be touched by multiple people and passed out, and, you know, less danger for germs if you just have a sign with the ceremony program on it and don't worry about it. It's easier for you too. And then my last point is not to throw or toss anything at the end of the ceremony, because again, people are touching something and then throwing it at people. Not ideal, low risk, but there's a non-zero risk of transmission. And for God's sake, no blowing of bubbles, because people tend to spit when they blow bubbles. So that's the last thing we want. We definitely don't want any spitting of any kind. So bubbles are out. If you were thinking of doing bubbles, it's not gonna work. That's a bad idea. So that's basically everything I could think of for the ceremony. So like I said, next time I'm gonna talk about the cocktail hour and the dinner reception. And last time I talked about dancing at the reception and what you can do instead. So I'm kind of going out of order, but just whatever, go with it. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions or concerns that I haven't addressed, or suggestions for things that you think people should do to have a socially distanced ceremony. And I will be back in 2 weeks to share some more tips. All right, bye for now.